Imagine walking home alone at night, the cold wind biting at your skin as you stumble through empty streets. You feel a presence, someone's watching. The next thing you know, you're gasping for air, pulled into icy water, your screams swallowed by the darkness. What if your death, like countless others, is ruled an accident, and the only trace left behind is a mocking smiley face painted nearby? Could you be the next victim of the Smiley Face Killers? Chapter 1: The Drowned Victims. The Smiley Face Killer theory revolves around a series of mysterious drownings of young men that have occurred across the United States over the past 2 decades. Many of these cases share disturbingly similar characteristics. The victims are typically college-aged men or young professionals, fit and athletic, often with a background in sports, and are last seen after a night of drinking with friends. These men are found in bodies of water days, weeks, or even months after they were first reported missing. Despite the presence of suspicious circumstances in several of these deaths, most have been ruled as accidental drownings or undetermined. The theory, put forward by retired NYPD detectives Kevin Gannon and Anthony Duarte, posits that the drownings are not isolated incidents, but the work of a serial killer or organized group. Key cases. 1. Patrick McNeil, New York. One of the earliest cases associated with the Smiley Face Killer theory is the disappearance and death of 21-year-old Patrick McNeil. Patrick, a Fordham University student, was last seen leaving a Manhattan bar in February 1997. His body was found nearly 2 months later, floating in the East River over 12 miles away from where he was last seen. Initially ruled as an accidental drowning, independent investigators pointed out several anomalies. There were no signs of struggle or injury consistent with a fall into the water, and the position of his body in the river seemed inconsistent with natural water flow. Moreover, witnesses reported seeing a car following Patrick as he left the bar, and a strong smell of chemicals was detected on his body, suggesting the possibility of incapacitation before his death. 2. Dakota James, Pittsburgh. Dakota James, a 23-year-old Duquesne University graduate student, went missing on January 25, 2017, after a night out with friends in downtown Pittsburgh. Surveillance footage captured him walking toward a bridge over the Allegheny River, and it was the last confirmed sighting of him. His body was recovered from the Ohio River 40 days later. Although his death was ruled as an accidental drowning, his family and some independent investigators were unconvinced. They noted the absence of decomposition and the pristine condition of his body, which did not align with having been in water for over a month. Additionally, there were marks around his neck that appeared suspicious, suggesting possible strangulation. No definitive explanation was provided, and the case remains controversial. 3. Chris Jenkins, Minneapolis. Chris Jenkins was a 21-year-old University of Minnesota student who disappeared after being ejected from a bar on Halloween night in 2002. His body was found 4 months later in the Mississippi River, still wearing the costume he had on the night he went missing. The initial ruling was that Chris accidentally fell into the river while intoxicated, but pressure from his family led authorities to change the cause of death to homicide in 2006. Investigators pointed out that Chris's body was discovered face up, a rare position for drowning victims, and there were no signs of injury consistent with the fall. Additional evidence suggested that his hands may have been bound, although the details remain inconclusive. This case became a pivotal point for the Smiley Face Killer theory, as it raised questions about the thoroughness of initial investigations. 4. Brian Welzian, Chicago. Brian Welzian, a 21-year-old college student from Northern Illinois University, was last seen on New Year's Eve 1999, leaving a party in downtown Chicago. His body was discovered 77 days later on a beach in Gary, Indiana, over 30 miles away from where he was last seen. While the cause of death was ruled as accidental drowning, many unusual factors suggest otherwise. His body showed minimal decomposition, inconsistent with having been in the water for nearly 3 months. The autopsy revealed that Brian had high levels of GHB, a common date rape drug, in his system, raising the possibility that he was drugged and then placed in the water after death. The unexplained presence of GHB further fueled speculation about foul play, patterns, and red flags. Independent investigators, led by Gannon and Duarte, have identified a series of patterns that link these cases together. One of the most striking patterns is the profile of the victims. Nearly all were young, white males between the ages of 18 and 25, fit and athletic, and many were either college students or recent graduates. They were last seen leaving bars or parties late at night, often intoxicated or under the influence of drugs. This suggests that the perpetrators might be targeting victims who are vulnerable due to their impaired state. In several cases, autopsy reports have shown an absence of water in the lungs, a key indicator that the victim may not have drowned while conscious. Additionally, there are cases where the body exhibited signs of blunt force trauma or unexplained bruises. These findings have been dismissed as post-mortem injuries caused by contact with underwater debris, but families and independent experts have argued that the injuries are more consistent with an assault. Another alarming pattern is the presence of missing time gaps. Many of the victims were missing for an extended period before their bodies were recovered. When the bodies were found, they often displayed signs of being preserved, such as minimal decomposition or the appearance of having been recently placed in the water. This discrepancy suggests that the victims may have been held somewhere else before their bodies were disposed of, rather than drowning immediately after disappearing. Most of these incidents occurred in urban areas with a concentration of bars, rivers, or lakes, and in nearly all cases, the bodies were found in a body of water downstream from where the victim was last seen. This geographical consistency has led some to speculate that the killers are familiar with these areas and use the water as a convenient dumping ground to conceal evidence. Lastly, the smiley face symbol found near several crime scenes has become a point of controversy. Critics argue that the symbol is too common and widespread to be used as definitive evidence linking these cases. However, Gannon and Duarte have pointed out that the symbols were often placed in obscure locations near the water's edge, suggesting intentionality rather than coincidence. The strange circumstances surrounding these deaths, the consistent victim profile, and the suspicious lack of conclusive evidence have fueled the belief that these drownings are not mere accidents. While law enforcement agencies remain divided on the legitimacy of the smiley face killer theory, the growing number of cases fitting this pattern has compelled independent investigators and families to push for more comprehensive inquiries. Whether these deaths are the work of an organized network or a series of isolated incidents with eerie similarities, the story of the drowned victims continues to be one of the most perplexing unsolved mysteries in modern American true crime. Chapter 2. The Smiley Face Symbol. The Smiley Face Killer theory began to take shape when two retired New York City detectives, Kevin Gannon and Anthony Duarte, noticed a peculiar symbol repeatedly found near the locations where young men's bodies were recovered. During their investigation into the unexplained drowning of Patrick McNeil in 1997, Gannon and Duarte started to identify similarities between this case and several others across the country. The detectives were struck by the proximity of graffiti depicting smiley faces to the locations where the victims were found, and they began documenting these findings as potential evidence. In 2008, after extensive research, Gannon and Duarte formally presented their findings and the theory they developed around these symbols. They suggested that the smiley face graffiti could be a deliberate calling card left by a serial killer or a group of killers, marking their presence at the scene. According to their research, over 22 cases of young male drownings across 11 states showed a correlation between the discovery of the bodies and nearby smiley face graffiti. The smiley faces appeared in various styles and colors, but they shared a distinct trait. They were located in obscure spots, such as under bridges, on secluded walls, or near riverbanks, places not immediately visible to the public. This led Gannon and Duarte to theorize that the symbols were not meant for the general public, but for the killers themselves, acting as a form of communication or a ritualistic signature. One of the first documented instances of the smiley face being found was in La Crosse, Wisconsin, near the location where 21-year-old Lucas Homan's body was discovered in the Mississippi River in 2006. The graffiti was situated on a concrete pillar beneath a bridge, an area that required effort and familiarity to access. The detectives documented another smiley face drawing in Ames, Iowa, close to the spot where 20-year-old William Billy Smolinski was recovered. Similar findings were noted in New York, Minneapolis, and Pittsburgh, creating a trail of eerie markings that followed the bodies of these young men. The smiley face symbol, which has been widely regarded as a benign image representing happiness or humor, takes on a sinister connotation when connected to these deaths. Gannon and Duarte posited that the symbol could be a way for the killer to mock the authorities, signaling their elusiveness and mocking the tragic nature of crimes. The smiley face might be interpreted as a taunting gesture, turning an otherwise cheerful symbol into a chilling emblem of death and loss. In some instances, the graffiti was accompanied by additional elements, such as horns on the smiley face or cryptic phrases that could suggest an organized group's involvement. For example, in Pittsburgh, where Dakota James's body was found, a smiley face with horns was painted in red on a storm drain not far from the recovery site. In other locations, the smiley face graffiti was paired with the word Sinsinawa, a possible reference to Sinsinawa Mound, a geographic landmark associated with local Native American legends and believed by some to have spiritual significance. This suggests that the killers, if the theory holds true, may have chosen these symbols with deliberate intent, potentially reflecting a deeper ideological or ritualistic motive. However, the varied styles and placements of these smiley face symbols raise questions about their authenticity as a signature. Critics argue that since graffiti is ubiquitous in many urban areas, the presence of a smiley face near water bodies could be coincidental, especially since smiley faces are among the most commonly drawn symbols worldwide. Still, Gannon and Duarte have maintained that the deliberate choice of locations and the timing of the graffiti's appearance in relation to the drownings indicate something more than mere coincidence. The smiley face killer theory has faced substantial criticism from law enforcement agencies, forensic experts, and the media. Many argue that the theory relies too heavily on circumstantial evidence and tenuous connections. The FBI, for instance, has publicly stated that there is no credible evidence linking the smiley face graffiti to the drownings and does not support the notion of a nationwide serial killer or network. One of the primary criticisms is the lack of concrete forensic evidence tying the graffiti to the victims. Despite the numerous cases documented by Gannon and Duarte, there has been no DNA, fingerprint, or video evidence that definitively links the smiley faces to the supposed killer. Furthermore, investigators have pointed out that the graffiti in question could have been painted at any time, before, during, or after the victims were reported missing or found, making it impossible to establish a direct connection between the graffiti and the drownings. Skeptics also argue that the smiley face symbol is too generic to be considered a reliable calling card. Unlike the distinctive symbols used by known serial killers, such as the Zodiac Killer's crosshair, the smiley face is so widespread that it appears in countless public spaces. This widespread nature makes it difficult to determine whether the smiley faces found near the bodies were related to the crimes or simply a result of coincidence and urban decay. Another criticism centers on the theory's methodology. Critics have accused Gannon and Duarte of cherry-picking cases that fit their narrative while ignoring other drowning deaths that do not align with the theory. They point out that there are many unsolved drowning cases that lack any smiley face graffiti or other symbolic markers, which calls into question the consistency and validity of the theory. Moreover, geographical and temporal discrepancies have been noted. While some of the drownings occurred in clusters, others were isolated incidents that did not follow a clear pattern. The distances between the crime scenes and the gaps in time also make it difficult to argue for a cohesive, organized network of killers, as proposed by the detectives. Despite these criticisms, Gannon and Duarte have persisted in their advocacy for the smiley face killer theory. They believe that the opposition they face is partly due to the unwillingness of local law enforcement agencies to reclassify these deaths as homicides, given the lack of definitive proof and the complexities involved in reopening these cases. They have continued to investigate new cases that fit the profile, maintaining that the smiley face symbol should not be dismissed outright without further scrutiny. The smiley face symbol, whether coincidental or intentional, has become a focal point of a contentious debate. For Gannon and Duarte, it represents a crucial link between cases that would otherwise be considered isolated incidents. For critics, it's a stretch of the imagination, a red herring that distracts from the real issues at hand. As the investigation into the Smiley Face Killer theory continues, the meaning and relevance of the smiley face symbol remain a divisive topic, one that blurs the line between conspiracy and credible evidence in the complex world of true crime investigations. Chapter 3: The Possible Modus Operandi. Theories of the Killings. The Smiley Face Killer theory proposes that the unexplained drowning deaths of young men across the United States are not accidental, but the result of deliberate actions by one or more individuals. Several theories have emerged over the years regarding the potential modus operandi of these suspected killers. The most prominent hypothesis is that a single serial killer or a coordinated group is abducting, incapacitating, and ultimately drowning these victims. However, the mechanics of these alleged crimes and the methods used to overpower the victims remain speculative due to the lack of direct witnesses or concrete forensic evidence. According to the theory, the killers primarily target college-age men who have been drinking and are therefore more vulnerable. The victims are typically last seen leaving a bar or a party alone, often late at night or in the early hours of the morning. The proposed method of abduction involves the use of force or the administration of incapacitating substances, such as gamma-hydroxybutyrate, a powerful sedative known to induce unconsciousness. Several autopsy reports have indicated elevated levels of GHB in the victims' systems, despite there being no history of voluntary use of the drug by the deceased. This suggests the possibility that the victims were drugged before being taken. Once incapacitated, it is believed that the victims are transported to a secondary location, where they are held for an indeterminate period. Some investigators have pointed out the unusual state of the bodies when recovered, noting minimal decomposition despite the length of time they were missing. This has led to the theory that the victims were not immediately placed in water, but rather kept somewhere else before being disposed of. This pattern has been observed in cases like that of Dakota James, where the autopsy showed signs of ligature marks and the body's condition did not align with having been in water for over a month. The final stage of the modus operandi involves placing the body in a body of water, often downstream or far from the point of disappearance. This complicates the investigation by making it difficult to determine the exact location and circumstances of the drowning. In many cases, the victims' bodies are found in a position inconsistent with natural drowning scenarios, such as being face up or showing a lack of water in the lungs, indicating that they may have been placed in the water post-mortem. This deliberate positioning further suggests the possibility of premeditation and calculated staging by the perpetrator. Behavioral analysis. Criminologists and FBI profilers have offered differing interpretations regarding the psychological profile and behavior of the potential killers. Kevin Gannon and Anthony Duarte, the primary proponents of the Smiley Face Killer theory, believe that the consistency and repetition of these drownings point to the work of an organized group of individuals. They argue that the killers exhibit a high level of sophistication, knowledge of forensic countermeasures, and familiarity with the areas where the bodies are discovered. The theory posits that these killers communicate through online forums or other clandestine channels, sharing techniques and coordinating their actions across state lines. The concept of an organized network is supported by the geographical distribution of the deaths, which are often clustered around major cities with prominent college campuses. The killers could be operating as part of a loosely connected cell structure, making it difficult for law enforcement to identify a single ringleader or trace their activities back to a centralized source. This structure could also explain the variation in the style of graffiti found near some of the bodies, suggesting that different individuals or groups may be emulating the same pattern. On the other hand, some experts, including forensic psychologist Dr. Catherine Ramsland, suggest that these drownings may not necessarily be the work of a coordinated group, but rather a series of copycat crimes or unrelated incidents that share similar characteristics. She points out that the absence of direct communication between the suspected killers, lack of a clear motive, and inconsistency in the handling of victims complicate the theory of a single, organized network. Dr. Ramsland's analysis suggests that if the drownings are homicides, the killers may be individuals acting independently, but influenced by the same cultural or psychological factors, such as a fascination with death or a desire to assert control over victims. An alternative theory is that the drownings could be the work of a single, highly mobile individual who targets specific types of victims and leaves behind the smiley face symbol as a signature. This hypothesis argues that the perpetrator could be a transient person with the resources to travel across states, such as a truck driver or a person involved in itinerant work, enabling them to strike in different locations without drawing attention. The varied nature of the smiley face graffiti could then be interpreted as a deliberate attempt to confuse authorities or a manifestation of the killer's psychological state. Consistencies and variations. There are several consistencies in the cases associated with the smiley face killer theory. Nearly all the victims were last seen intoxicated and alone, making them easy targets for abduction. The drownings often occurred during winter or early spring, when fewer people are likely to be outdoors and witness suspicious activities. The locations where the bodies are found tend to be areas with fast-moving rivers, lakes, or other bodies of water that complicate recovery efforts and obscure forensic evidence. However, there are also significant variations that challenge the theory. For example, while some victims showed signs of physical trauma, such as ligature marks or blunt force injuries, others did not exhibit any evidence of a struggle. The state of the bodies when found also varies widely. Some are well preserved, suggesting minimal time in the water, while others are heavily decomposed, which makes it difficult to establish a precise timeline of death. Another point of divergence is the presence or absence of the smiley face symbol. In some cases, no graffiti was found near the recovery site, leading skeptics to argue that the smiley face connection is tenuous at best. Additionally, the type and placement of the graffiti differ, ranging from crude, hastily drawn smiley faces to elaborate depictions with additional symbols or messages. This inconsistency could indicate either multiple perpetrators with different artistic styles, or that some of the graffiti is entirely unrelated to the crimes. Moreover, while the majority of the victims were young, white males, there have been exceptions to this pattern, raising questions about whether the killers have a clear victim profile, or if some of these deaths are being misclassified as part of the smiley face killer phenomenon. Chapter 4. Investigations and law enforcement responses. Initial police reactions. From the very beginning, law enforcement agencies across the United States have faced criticism for their handling of the alleged smiley face killer cases. Local police departments have often dismissed these deaths as tragic accidents or the unfortunate consequence of alcohol-related drownings. Many of the cases involved young men who were last seen intoxicated, leaving bars or parties late at night. This has led authorities to conclude that the victims likely stumbled into nearby bodies of water while impaired. Despite repeated pleas from families and independent investigators for more thorough inquiries, the standard response from law enforcement has been to close these cases as accidental drownings. One of the most prominent early cases, that of Patrick McNeil in 1997, set a precedent for how these deaths were to be treated. Patrick, a Fordham University student, was last seen leaving a bar in Manhattan and was later found dead in the East River. The NYPD initially ruled his death an accidental drowning, stating that he must have fallen into the river while disoriented. It was only through the persistent efforts of his family and former NYPD detectives Kevin Gannon and Anthony Duarte that the case was reopened and scrutinized further. Despite evidence that suggested foul play, such as witness reports of a vehicle following Patrick and chemical odors on his body, no homicide investigation was launched, and the official ruling remained unchanged. In La Crosse, Wisconsin, a city with multiple suspected smiley face killer cases, police have similarly ruled most of these deaths as accidental drownings. Between 1997 and 2010, 9 young men disappeared after nights out drinking and were later found drowned in the Mississippi River. The La Crosse Police Department maintained that these deaths were unrelated and attributed them to alcohol consumption and the victims' impaired state near a dangerous river. Local law enforcement even launched campaigns urging students to use the buddy system and avoid walking alone at night, effectively focusing on prevention rather than re-examining whether these incidents were the result of foul play. This pattern of dismissive initial responses is not unique to these locations. In many cities where similar deaths have occurred, Minneapolis, Pittsburgh, and Chicago among them, police have attributed the incidents to accidental drownings. often citing a lack of evidence pointing to criminal activity. Families and independent investigators argue that this approach has led to the premature closing of cases that may warrant further investigation, potentially allowing a serial killer or group of killers to continue operating undetected. Reopened cases. Despite these initial rulings, several cases have been reopened due to pressure from families, media coverage, and independent investigators. These efforts have often been spearheaded by retired detectives Kevin Gannon and Anthony Duarte, who have advocated for a more comprehensive investigation into the theory linking these deaths. They argue that the similarities in the cases, such as the demographics of the victims, the circumstances of their disappearances, and the locations where their bodies were recovered, point to a pattern that should not be ignored. One notable example is the case of Chris Jenkins, a University of Minnesota student who went missing in 2002 after being ejected from a bar. His body was found months later in the Mississippi River, with his arms crossed over his chest and his hands clasped, a position that raised questions about whether he had drowned naturally. Initially ruled as an accidental drowning, the case was reopened in 2006 after new evidence and the persistence of his family. The medical examiner changed the manner of death to homicide, citing the suspicious positioning of the body and lack of consistent drowning indicators. While the investigation did not ultimately lead to an arrest, it demonstrated the importance of family advocacy in challenging official findings. Similarly, in the case of Dakota James in Pittsburgh, his family's insistence on a second opinion led to a private investigation that uncovered previously overlooked details, such as the presence of ligature marks around his neck. Although the official cause of death remains accidental drowning, these findings have kept the case in the public eye and fueled ongoing calls for a deeper investigation. These reopened cases have highlighted the limitations of initial police investigations and have, in some instances, forced law enforcement agencies to reconsider their conclusions. However, without conclusive evidence or a suspect, most of the cases remain unresolved, leaving families without closure. Forensic and technological challenges. One of the primary obstacles to linking these cases is the inherent difficulty of investigating drowning deaths. When a body is recovered from water, crucial evidence is often lost or degraded, making it challenging to determine the exact cause and manner of death. Forensic evidence such as DNA, fibers, or signs of physical struggle can be washed away, and the prolonged exposure to water accelerates decomposition, obscuring injuries that may have been sustained prior to drowning. Autopsy reports in many of these cases have revealed troubling inconsistencies. Some victims showed signs of blunt force trauma or ligature marks that were dismissed as post-mortem injuries caused by underwater debris or the natural movement of the body in water. Other autopsies indicated elevated levels of GHB or alcohol, substances that could either be the result of voluntary ingestion or evidence of drugging. Without clear indications of homicide, medical examiners have been reluctant to classify these deaths as suspicious, leading to a default ruling of accidental drowning. Technological limitations have also hampered investigations. Surveillance footage, when available, is often grainy or incomplete, providing little insight into what happened during the victim's last known moments. For example, in the case of Brian Welzian in Chicago, surveillance footage captured him walking alone, but the quality was insufficient to identify any suspicious activity around him before he vanished. Similarly, gaps in video coverage due to the victim's erratic paths home or blind spots in the area make it difficult to trace their movements or pinpoint potential abduction sites. Another significant issue is the lack of a national database for similar incidents. While the FBI has publicly stated that they do not support the Smiley Face Killer theory, there is no centralized system for tracking these drowning deaths across multiple jurisdictions. This fragmentation means that local law enforcement agencies often view each case in isolation, without considering potential links to other cases outside their immediate area. As a result, patterns that may be evident on a national scale are overlooked or dismissed as coincidental. Chapter 5. The Smiley Face Symbol. Occult Significance and Ritualistic Killings. The smiley face symbol is generally associated with positivity, happiness, and simplicity. It gained popularity in the 1960s and 70s as a pop culture icon and became synonymous with good vibes and cheerfulness. However, in the context of the Smiley Face Killer theory, this seemingly benign symbol takes on a far darker and more sinister meaning. The repeated appearance of smiley face graffiti near the locations where young men's bodies have been recovered has led some investigators and independent researchers to speculate whether the symbol carries an occult or esoteric significance. The smiley face, in its current form, may seem innocuous, but symbols have been known to hold different meanings in different contexts throughout history. Some researchers argue that symbols, when used in repetitive contexts like crime scenes, can indicate hidden messages, associations, or even ritualistic intent. The circle and the arc, fundamental components of the smiley face, have long been elements in various occult traditions. In certain occult practices, the circle represents unity, infinity, and protection. It is a shape commonly used in ritualistic settings to create a boundary between the physical world and the spiritual realm. The eyes and the smile, which in the smiley face symbol form a simplified human visage, can be viewed as representations of duality, the juxtaposition of happiness against a void or emptiness. In some interpretations, this duality may suggest a hidden malevolence behind an outwardly friendly facade. While there is no direct historical evidence linking the smiley face to a known occult group or ritual, its use as a potential signature in these drowning cases raises questions. Could the repeated presence of this symbol near drowning sites be a way for the perpetrators to communicate something more profound? Or is it simply a coincidence? The theory that the smiley face is connected to secret societies or ritualistic practices is based largely on its recurrent appearance and placement near the locations where bodies are found. In ritualistic killings, perpetrators often leave behind symbols or markers that signify their intent or affiliation. Historically, secret societies such as the Freemasons or other clandestine groups have used symbols like the all-seeing eye, pentagrams, and other geometric shapes to signify their presence and beliefs. While there is no documented evidence directly linking the smiley face symbol to such groups, proponents of the theory argue that the smiley face could be an adapted version of these older symbols. Some have pointed out that, when inverted or altered, the smiley face takes on a more menacing or mocking appearance, which could be intended to convey the perpetrator's disdain or arrogance. The placement of the smiley face symbols is also worth examining. In many cases, the symbols are not readily visible to the casual observer. They are often found under bridges on secluded walls or in obscure locations near where the victims' bodies were recovered. This suggests that if these symbols are connected to the drownings, they are not meant for public consumption, but rather as a form of private communication between the perpetrators or as a ritual marker indicating a successful hunt. In the realm of occult symbolism, the use of certain images and glyphs is believed to have the power to summon, bind, or communicate with spiritual entities. Some proponents of the smiley face killer theory have explored the possibility that the smiley face might be used as part of a ritualistic practice, either to mark the location of a death or as a symbolic offering. One theory suggests that the smiley face could represent a form of death sigil, a symbol used to consecrate a location where a death has occurred, sealing it as a site of power or sacrifice. While this idea may sound far-fetched, it's worth noting that in various cultures, symbols have been used in rituals to guide spirits or claim territories. For example, in some pagan traditions, the circle is used as a protective barrier during ceremonies. If the smiley face symbol is being used in a similar fashion, it could imply that the drownings are part of a larger ritualistic pattern aimed at channeling or controlling supernatural forces. Furthermore, there is the unsettling idea that these drownings could be a form of ritualistic offering or sacrifice. In historical and modern occult practices, bodies of water have been associated with purification, transformation, and the passage between life and death. Rivers, lakes, and oceans are often viewed as conduits to the underworld or spiritual planes. If the drownings are intentional, it's possible that the killers are using these bodies of water as ritual sites, disposing of the bodies in such a way as to complete a spiritual or symbolic act. Although there is no direct evidence of a ritualistic connection in the smiley face killer cases, there have been documented instances in history where symbols were used in criminal contexts. In the 1990s, the satanic panic phenomenon gripped the United States, and there were several reported cases of ritualistic killings that were believed to be connected to satanic cults. While many of these cases were later debunked or found to be exaggerations, the use of symbols like pentagrams and inverted crosses was a common element in these investigations. Similarly, the Zodiac Killer in the 1960s and 70s used symbols in his communications with police and the media, including the infamous crosshair symbol. These symbols served to both taunt authorities and solidify the killer's identity. The smiley face, while not as overtly menacing, could serve a similar purpose, marking the crime scene and mocking those trying to catch the perpetrator. Could the smiley face symbol indicate a cult or group? Some researchers have proposed that the smiley face symbol could indicate the presence of a cult-like group, one that uses the symbol as a way of marking territory or celebrating a successful ritual. This theory, while lacking direct evidence, draws on the idea that the drownings are not isolated acts, but rather part of a larger coordinated effort. The varied styles of the smiley face graffiti found at different crime scenes could suggest different members or cells within a larger group, each with their own interpretation of the symbol. Alternatively, the graffiti could serve as a means of communication between members of a group, signaling that a specific location has been claimed or that a ritual has been completed. This would align with historical examples of secret societies using symbols to communicate covertly. Chapter 6. A network of killers or urban legend. The Smiley Face Killer theory posits that a string of mysterious drownings across the United States could be the work of an organized network of killers. This theory, first put forward by retired NYPD detectives Kevin Gannon and Anthony Duarte, suggests that a group or groups of individuals may be working in coordination to abduct, incapacitate, and ultimately drown young men under the guise of accidental deaths. But how plausible is the idea that these deaths are the result of a coordinated network rather than isolated incidents? Supporters of the theory argue that there are several key factors suggesting an organized operation. First, the demographic consistency of the victims is striking. Nearly all were young, athletic, and academically successful men, many of whom were college students. The victims were often last seen leaving bars or parties late at night, intoxicated and alone, making them vulnerable targets. Additionally, bodies were often recovered in bodies of water located far from where the victims were last seen, suggesting that the victims were transported before being placed in the water. The theory further suggests that the killers may communicate and coordinate through online forums or dark web channels, similar to how other criminal networks have operated in the past. The dark web has previously been used by groups involved in drug trafficking, human trafficking, and illegal arms sales, making it feasible that a coordinated group could be using these channels to share information, tactics, and targets. However, there is no documented evidence that directly ties an online network to these drownings, and this remains a speculative aspect of the theory. One of the most compelling pieces of circumstantial evidence put forward by Gannon and Duarte is the repeated appearance of smiley face graffiti at or near the sites where the bodies are discovered. While critics argue that smiley faces are common and could easily be coincidental, proponents believe the recurrence of the symbol, often in obscure and difficult to access locations, indicates a deliberate marking by the killers, serving as a form of communication or a ritualistic signature. This symbolic repetition could suggest a shared ideology or motive among the perpetrators. If the theory of an organized network is true, the logistics would require significant planning and resources. Coordinating abductions, transporting incapacitated victims, and disposing of bodies across state lines without drawing attention is no small feat. This has led some to speculate that the killers could be individuals with specific skills or occupations that allow for mobility, such as truck drivers or traveling salespeople. Additionally, the pattern of killings across multiple states suggests that the perpetrators have a wide geographical range, further complicating efforts to investigate and connect the cases. However, there is no direct evidence linking the smiley face symbol, the drownings, and a coordinated group of killers. Despite extensive investigations by Gannon, Duarte, and other private detectives, no arrests have been made and no suspects have been identified. Without more concrete proof, the network theory remains largely circumstantial. The media's role. The media has played a crucial role in both popularizing and polarizing the Smiley Face Killer theory. Since the theory's emergence, it has been the subject of numerous articles, documentaries, and true crime specials. The media's portrayal of the theory has varied widely, ranging from supportive narratives that delve into the possibility of a vast criminal network to dismissive articles that regard it as little more than a conspiracy theory. One of the first major media outlets to cover the theory was ABC's 2020, which aired an investigative piece in 2008. The program highlighted the similarities in several cases and featured interviews with Gannon and Duarte. This coverage brought national attention to the theory and sparked widespread public interest. Following this, several cable networks and streaming services produced documentaries exploring the theory in more depth, often focusing on the eerie presence of the smiley face symbols. However, as the theory gained traction, so did criticism. Many media outlets, including the New York Times and the Chicago Tribune, published articles that were skeptical of the theory, labeling it as speculative and unsupported by concrete evidence. These outlets cited statements from law enforcement agencies, including the FBI, that dismissed the theory as unsubstantiated. The FBI publicly stated that after reviewing the evidence, it found no indications that the drownings were connected or the result of a coordinated group. The conflicting media narratives have significantly shaped public perception. On one hand, sensationalized reports have fueled belief in the theory, leading to the formation of online communities dedicated to solving the mystery. On social media platforms and forums like Reddit, amateur detectives continue to debate the validity of the theory, share their own findings, and speculate about potential suspects. On the other hand, critical coverage has led many to view the theory as a classic case of confirmation bias, where seemingly connected cases are actually unrelated tragedies. The media's focus on the theory has also had real-world consequences. In some instances, law enforcement agencies have felt pressured to re-examine cases due to public demand and increased scrutiny. This has led to a complicated dynamic where the theory, despite being officially dismissed, continues to persist in the public consciousness as an unsolved enigma, much like the theories surrounding the Zodiac Killer or Jack the Ripper. Contrary perspectives. While Gannon and Duarte remain steadfast in their belief in the Smiley Face Killer theory, many experts in criminology and law enforcement have offered contrary perspectives. One of the most common arguments against the theory is that it falls prey to confirmation bias and flawed pattern recognition. Critics argue that the human mind is naturally inclined to find patterns, even where none exist. This phenomenon, known as apophenia, is often observed in cases where people link disparate events based on superficial similarities. In the context of the Smiley Face Killer theory, skeptics believe that Gannon and Duarte may have selectively focused on certain cases that fit their narrative while disregarding others that do not. For example, many drowning deaths that fit the demographic profile of the victims lack any smiley face graffiti or signs of foul play. By highlighting only the cases with these markers, the theory may give the illusion of a connected series of crimes when, in reality, these are isolated incidents. Additionally, the argument is made that alcohol-related drownings are unfortunately common, particularly among young men. College students and young professionals are at a higher risk of accidental drowning due to their propensity to engage in risky behaviors, such as drinking to excess. Law enforcement agencies have pointed to statistics showing that many of these drownings occurred in areas known for high levels of alcohol consumption and near bodies of water, factors that are commonly associated with accidental deaths. From a criminological standpoint, the theory also faces challenges. Serial killers typically operate within specific geographic areas and display a consistent modus operandi. The wide distribution of these drownings, coupled with the variation in the circumstances of each case, makes it difficult to argue for a single perpetrator or even a coordinated group. Most experts believe that if there were an organized group responsible, it would have left behind more concrete evidence, such as identifiable patterns in the disposal of the bodies or forensic traces linking the cases. Chapter 7. Seeking Justice. Where do we go from here? The ongoing battle for answers. Families of the young men whose deaths are linked to the Smiley Face Killer theory have become central figures in the ongoing quest for truth and justice. Frustrated by the lack of conclusive findings from law enforcement, many have taken it upon themselves to conduct independent investigations, hire private detectives, and push for additional forensic testing. The parents of Dakota James, for example, enlisted the help of forensic pathologist Dr. Cyril Wecht, whose second autopsy revealed signs of possible ligature marks around Dakota's neck, evidence that contradicts the initial ruling of accidental drowning. The financial burden of private investigations has led many families to turn to crowdfunding platforms. Campaigns on websites like GoFundMe have raised money to pay for advanced forensic analysis, such as toxicology tests that are often beyond the reach of local authorities. These funds have enabled families to challenge official findings, presenting new evidence that raises doubts about the nature of their loved ones' deaths. Despite these efforts, however, few cases have been officially reopened, highlighting the difficulties families face in overturning initial rulings and obtaining justice. Legislative and policy changes. The persistence of families and independent investigators has sparked discussions about the need for legislative and policy changes to improve the investigation of potential serial crimes. One of the main issues is the lack of a centralized database for tracking suspicious drowning deaths across different jurisdictions. Law enforcement agencies often operate in silos, viewing each case independently, which can result in misconnections and patterns that might indicate serial activity. To address this issue, some advocacy groups have proposed creating a national database for unexplained drownings and other unusual deaths. Such a database would enable law enforcement to identify trends and facilitate communication across state lines. Additionally, families have lobbied for changes in how suspected drowning deaths are investigated, pushing for mandatory secondary autopsies or standardized procedures for reviewing cases that involve young, healthy individuals. These proposed changes have met with resistance due to budgetary constraints and the difficulty of implementing new protocols at a national level. Nevertheless, the efforts of these families have brought greater awareness to the shortcomings of current investigative processes and have opened the door for potential reforms that could aid in the future identification and prevention of similar deaths. Whether the Smiley Face Killer theory proves to be a key to uncovering a modern-day serial killer or a cautionary tale of investigative overreach, its impact on the true crime community is undeniable. The theory has forced a re-examination of cases that were previously considered closed, encouraged a dialogue on the limitations of forensic investigations, and prompted new investigative techniques in the examination of potential serial crimes. The unresolved nature of these cases continues to haunt families and investigators alike. For some, the theory represents hope that their loved ones' deaths will not be forgotten and that justice may still be served. For others, it serves as a reminder of the complexities of crime solving, where sometimes the answers remain just out of reach. The Smiley Face Killer theory, regardless of its ultimate validity, has left an indelible mark on the landscape of true crime, raising questions that demand answers, if not today, then someday in the future.